Hi, I'm JJ Behrens. I'm a developer advocate at Google, and I'm here to talk about using Ruby on Rails and YouTube for educational applications. So here's my goal. I want to talk about four things. I want to talk about Ruby on Rails, I want to talk about YouTube, I want to talk about education, and I want to talk about test-driven development. And I want to do it all at the same time. This is what I call a peanut butter, banana, and honey sandwich. YouTube is, of course, the honey because videos make everything sweeter. Education is the banana because everyone knows that education is bananas. Ruby on Rails is the peanut butter because it holds everything together, and then test-driven development is the bread because without the bread holding things together, everything just falls apart. Let me talk about YouTube EDU first. I promise I'll get to some more technical content in a minute. The goal of YouTube EDU is to engage, educate, and inspire. As of 2011, we had 700 educational channels, 500,000 educational videos, and 3 billion educational video views. The vision of YouTube EDU is to provide a vibrant, global platform where anyone, anywhere can obtain a world-class education. Whether you are a student, teacher, or gifted storyteller, our hope is that you'll be able to continually discover, create, and share educational videos with the world. I know this is a technical talk, but I hope you won't mind if I show you this one really great video about YouTube EDU. It's a video about YouTube for schools.
If this does not blow your mind.
Hola, buenos días.
And I swing downwards the ball. You should get that same.
It is a dream deeply rooted in the American dream.
And we eventually broke the code.
Today, students, we're going to learn about oxygen.
So let's talk about using Ruby with YouTube APIs. First of all, some brutal honesty. Let's face it, Ruby developers are a lot more likely to talk about Amazon APIs than they are to talk about Google APIs. And Google job postings are a lot more likely to talk about Python than they are to talk about Ruby. But there are a lot of us here at Google who love Ruby, and I want to help you overcome the hurdles that Ruby developers face when they start using Google APIs in general and YouTube APIs specifically. In order to pave the way, I wrote a sample application. Quasimodo is a Ruby on Rails application that I wrote for this presentation. It uses the YouTube APIs as well as the Google Plus APIs, and I'm hoping to open source it as soon as possible. Let me show you an example of using it. Here we are at the welcome screen, and it says Quasimodo. Welcome to Quasimodo. This application lets you build video-based quizzes. I'm going to hit login to continue. It says, Quasimodo is requesting permission to manage your YouTube account, know who you are on Google, and perform these operations while I'm not using this application. And notice I'm on accounts.google.com. I'm going to go ahead and allow access. So here we are at the home page for Quasimodo. It says, welcome to Quasimodo. This application lets you build video-based quizzes, and it shows me the available quizzes. Each of these has a title, a thumbnail, an age, and a country. So let's click on Basic Trigonometry. Here we have a quiz on the left and a YouTube video on the right. And you could click to play the video and then answer the questions in the quiz. It's a pretty simple mashup. So let's go ahead and edit this quiz. We could change the name, the minimum age, and the country. We could select a new video, and we could pick a new form. I'll go ahead and search for a video. So this time I want to search for geometry. Gdata is used to get search results from YouTube, and you could pick any one of these videos to use with your quiz. Now, let me show you the form. This is actually a Google Docs form, and you can see here the title of the quiz and a bunch of questions. The idea is that anyone could use this form to add new questions by clicking here on Add Item and adding a new type of question, such as checkboxes, and then filling in the question title, the help text, and so forth. Now, when the user completes the quiz, all of the answers will automatically get saved to a spreadsheet, and here is the spreadsheet that the teacher can look at. And so we have one answer here with the timestamp, the length of the hypotenuse, and so forth. And so immediately the teacher could see all of the responses that students have filled out when they were answering the quiz. Now, let me give you an overview of YouTube APIs. With Gdata APIs, you could perform searches, upload videos, create playlists, and more. With player APIs, you could control the player using either ActionScript 3 or JavaScript. If you'd like to learn more, go to youtube.com/dev. So let me give you some advice concerning client libraries, and I'm going to get a little bit opinionated here. Be skeptical of client libraries. They're often poorly documented or out of date. I think you should understand and embrace REST APIs. They're often very well documented, especially at Google. Understand what the client library does. Read the documentation and the samples. And don't be afraid to skim the source, especially the tests. I think you should use client libraries when they make your life easier. Now, let me share a note about API versions. The current version of the Data API for YouTube is 2.1. It's based on the Gdata Api infrastructure. When the newer version of the Data API for YouTube comes out, it'll be version 3. And it'll be based on a newer API infrastructure. Other Google APIs, such as Google+, already use this newer API infrastructure. Different client libraries support different YouTube API versions, so it's important that you pick the right client library for the right API version. When version 3 comes out, we'll all be able to switch to the much nicer, more modern client libraries that are already in use by projects such as Google+. Now let me talk about the various Google client libraries for Ruby. First of all, there's Google API Ruby Client. This automatically creates bindings for the newer Google APIs. Signet is a client library that's used by Google API Ruby Client. It handles things like Oauth2, and it's also useful for working with older Google APIs. Gdata Ruby Util was a client library used for older Gdata-based Google APIs. It has a little bit of YouTube-specific code, but it doesn't include support for Oauth2, and it's no longer necessary. YouTubeIt is a fairly modern third-party library, but unfortunately, it doesn't include support for Oauth2 either. Here's what Quasimodo needed from a client library. First of all, I needed Oauth2, and I needed the ability to pass the YouTube developer key as a custom header. I needed support for both older and newer Google APIs. Here's what I used. I used the Google API Ruby client for talking to newer APIs such as Google+, and I used Signet for doing Oauth2 and talking to older APIs such as YouTube's Gdata API. So let me talk about Oauth2 because it's one of the biggest hurdles that Ruby developers face when they want to build an application for YouTube. So you might be wondering why you need Oauth2. Oauth2 is an authorization system. Using Oauth2, you could access an API on the user's behalf and do things with his account. Oauth2 supports different flows for different types of apps. There is even a flow for non-web enabled devices such as Xbox 360. Let me share with you the bigger picture. The user uses your app redirects the user to Google. Google asks the user if your app can access certain services on his behalf. Then Google redirects your app with some information and your app talks to Google to verify the authenticity of that information. Next, your app can use that information to access certain services on the user's behalf. The important thing here is that the user never has to share his username and password with your application. Now, the great thing about using Oauth2 for Quasimodo is that I don't need to create my own login system. I could use Oauth2 to get authorization to load the user's Google+ identity. Ask the user for read access to his Google+ and read-write access to his YouTube. So obviously, Oauth2 is too large of a subject for me to cover in 10 minutes, but let me show you where you can learn more. At oauthssodemo.appspot.com, we have a sample application that integrates with OpenID, which is very related to Oauth2. The nice thing about this application is that it shows you each step along the process along with the parameters involved. So here are the URLs involved, and here are the parameters involved. Now, let me go ahead and click Connect Me. So I'm going to go ahead and sign in. And now I'm logged in. And it shows my profile picture, which I decided to be inverse, and it shows my name. The next thing that I'd like to show off is the Oauth2 documentation for YouTube. Here's the URL, and here's what it looks like. When I first wanted to learn about Oauth2, I knew it was a bit of an intimidating subject, so I was very happy to see documentation on it. The documentation for YouTube API tends to be excellent because we have really good tech writers. So I read through this from top to bottom, and at the end, everything just made sense. The next thing that I'd like to show you is the Google API Ruby client. This is a library that's on code.google.com. Most importantly, I'd like to show you the source code. This is a small Sinatra application that integrates with Oauth2. It's actually fairly short, which is really nice because it makes it easy to integrate with your own Ruby on Rails application or Sinatra application. First, let me open up routes.rb. We have 3 routes here: Oauth2 authorize, Oauth2 callback, and logout. And these correspond to the 3 steps that you need in Oauth2. Each of these are based on the Oauth2 controller. Now let me show you application controller. There's a lot going on in this file, but the most important thing is the setup Oauth2 method. This method was taken from the earlier example I showed you from the Sinatra application. I took it and modified it slightly. So here we're setting up a Google API client with all the authorization and HTTP adapter stuff we need. And basically, I just tweaked the code that was there earlier. Now let me show you the Oauth2 controller. This class is actually fairly short. We have 3 methods: authorize, callback, and logout. Authorize sets up an authorization URI. Callback initializes the Signet client by fetching the access token and then does some work with the session, and then redirects. Logout basically resets the session. Now let me talk about doing test-driven development with RESTful web APIs. You might be asking yourself, why bother? Well, the fact of the matter is code without tests tends to break, whereas robust, well-tested code is better than fragile, once-tested code. It's not really reasonable to use a RESTful web API in your tests. First of all, it'd be too slow. It's not very easy to reset the state on the third-party server. There might be quota issues involved, and it's hard to cause certain error conditions to happen. Last of all, I like to code on BART, which is our local train system. I like integration tests. That means I'm going to load pages in my tests that make use of RESTful web APIs. So here are some common reactions I've heard. Some people say, oh, but doing test-driven development with RESTful web APIs is just too hard, or how do you write a stub for something that you barely even understand? Or my favorite, I work at Pivotal Labs. I've been doing test-driven development since the 2nd grade. Hurry up and show me some JavaScript. Here's my approach to doing test-driven development with RESTful web APIs. IRB is the standard interactive shell for Ruby. Pry is an IRB replacement. I use Pry to start a shell from within the right application context. Play with your app until you have all the context set up, and then add binding.pry somewhere in the code, probably in a controller action. Load the page and it'll hang. Now go play around with Pry in the terminal where you started Rails server. Use Pry to play around with the client library. Make a request and get a response that you're looking for. Then save the output for later. Now, as usual with test-driven development, the goal is to write some tests and write some code. It can be either a functional or an integration test. Add just enough code to your controller or whatever so that it tries to use the RESTful web API. Now, do something in your test so that it exercises the controller. I use WebMock. WebMock is a library for stubbing RESTful web APIs. It'll intercept and prevent your test from actually making web requests. It'll give you a snippet of code to stub out your request. Merge that snippet of code with the real response that you saved from earlier and put it into your test. Let me share some other random tricks. I tend to save the real response in a file with a realistic name based on the original URL that I requested. You should use these same techniques to handle all of your error cases. such as when your Oauth2 access token expires, or when you don't get any search results. Wrap your stubs in functions. That way you can reuse them for multiple functional or integration tests. In order to simulate an Oauth2 login, look at the tests that come with the Signet client library. Finally, you can use VCR to automate this whole process. Now let me demonstrate all the techniques that I've talked about so far. First of all, I have to admit that there's actually a bug in my application. If I search for a video with a random name, the application crashes. It said, no method error. You have a nil object when you didn't expect it. This is the Ruby programmer's nightmare. This is a typical bug. So I'm looking at the code and it says if search results subdata subitems.length equals 0, and it's crashing right there. Well, obviously, that's not quite right. I know that search results is defined in Quizzes controller, so let's go look at that code. Here in Quizzes controller, at the bottom we have a method called video search, and it defines search results. Here's the call to fetch YouTube resource. I added a binding.pry so that we could interrupt the request to see what's going on. So let's go over here and back in the browser, and I'll reload the page. You'll notice that it hangs. Back in the terminal where I started the server, I see that it stopped on binding.pry. I'm going to go a little bit further in code and grab this, fetch YouTube resource. I'm going to copy that, go back to the terminal and paste it. Here's the response. It's a lot of stuff, but you'll see that there's a body where it's talking about the API version and we see some data. I'm going to quit out of there. I'm going to type response.body. And here's the body that we're getting from YouTube. So this is nice because I could see exactly what YouTube is returning to me. I'm going to copy this. And I'll paste this into a new file. Back in quizzescontroller.rb, there's also a call to json.parse response.body. I want to try that out too because I want to see what the body looks like once it's been parsed. So I'll copy that and I'll paste that into my terminal. Here we see API version 2.1 and we see total items. And notice that we don't see anything about items, so there can't be a length. All we see is total items is 0. I'm going to copy and paste that too, just because it'll remind me of what I'm playing with. Now, I'm going to come to quizzes_spec.rb, and I'm going to write a test that simulates the bug. So I already have it written here, but I have it commented out. So we have a test that says, it gracefully handles no search results. And this is our spec. So I'm going to comment this out. It says, quiz equals factory quiz, log in, visit quiz video search URL for the quiz, fill in the queue with this random query, click the button search, and then the page should have content. Your search did not match any videos. I'm going to go ahead and save this. Now back in the terminal, I'm going to type rake spec. You'll see some warnings because the versions of the libraries that I'm using don't perfectly match up. Now, let's look at the test failure. It says, quizzes edit gracefully handles no search results. Okay, that's the right test. It says, webmock net connection not allowed error. Real HTTP connections are disabled. This is a sign that webmock is doing its job. It didn't allow my application to actually talk to the internet. The nice thing is it gives me this little snippet of code. It says, you could stub this request with the following snippet. Stub request, and it has a bunch of code. I'm going to grab that. Copy. I'm going to take that back to my Scratch file over here. And so it says stub request get, and here's the URL that I was requesting, and here's the body that I got. It shows an empty body right now. So I'm going to take that, and here's the actual body that I got from YouTube. I'm going to copy that and paste it here. And then I'll do some other massaging to get rid of the stuff that I don't care about, such as cache control, etc. Back in quizzes spec, I have an edited version of what I just showed you. Here's a stub request for get, and here's the URL, and here's the body that I expect. So now we've stubbed out the request completely. Okay, now I'm going to go back to my terminal. I type rake spec again. This time I get another failure. It says, action view template error. You have a nil object when you didn't expect it. The funny thing is, that's exactly what I wanted to see, because I haven't actually fixed the bug. I've only written a test that shows the bug. Now that we have a test that exercises the behavior I'm interested in, I could go fix the bug. Now let's look at videosearch.html.erb. This is where the original bug happened. It says if search results data items.length equals 0. So this code's wrong. Instead, let's delete this. And here's the correct code. If search results subdata subtotal items dot 2i equals 0. Let's try running that. It says your search did not match any videos. So now we know this bug has been fixed. But has it been fixed in our tests? Let's try that next. We run rake spec again. All green. 69 examples, 0 failures. This bug has been fixed. And now that my bug is fixed, my talk is done. So I'd like to thank you for listening. If you'd like to learn more, go to youtube.com/dev. If you'd like to follow us on Twitter, our Twitter handle is YouTubeDev. And I'm on Google+, so you could find me at gplus.to/Gynix. Thanks for watching.